Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name's Alan. I'm 48, and until recently, I thought I was living a good, stable life. My wife, Sophia, and I were married for 25 years. We built everything together: our home, my business, our family. She was my world. I thought we had trust, a partnership, and everything a marriage should be. Looking back now, there were probably signs, but I ignored them. Sophia always had a sharp edge to her. She could be manipulative, but I chalked it up to her being strong-willed. I admired her confidence. If someone had told me a year ago that she'd betray me, I'd have laughed. Sophia wasn't just my wife, she was my best friend. We were the perfect couple, at least to everyone else. I ran a small but successful construction business, and she worked in real estate. She was charismatic and knew how to charm people. Together, we made a great team. Or so I thought. Then came Daniel. Daniel was one of those guys you immediately dislike, but can't quite put your finger on why. He's wealthy, powerful, and always has that smug smile like he knows something you don't. We met him through one of Sophia's work events. He was a client of hers, looking to invest in property. I didn't think much of him at first. He was just another arrogant guy with too much money. But Sophia seemed impressed by him. I guess I should have been more worried when she started mentioning him more often. "Daniel's got such great ideas for the market," she'd say, or "Daniel thinks this area is going to explode soon." I shrugged it off. It was her job to network, right? Besides, I trusted her. 25 years of marriage. You'd think that kind of time builds an unshakable bond. The turning point came about 6 months ago when Sophia started acting off. She'd come home late, saying she was meeting clients or stuck at work. She started dressing differently, more polished, more revealing. She'd always been fashionable, but this felt like too much. When I asked about it, she brushed me off. "Don't be ridiculous, Alan. I'm just keeping up with the competition." Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. And then, a few weeks later, I overheard a phone call. It was late, and Sophia was in the kitchen. She didn't see me standing in the hallway. Her voice was soft, playful, nothing like how she usually talked to me. "I can't wait to see you," she said, giggling like a schoolgirl. My stomach dropped. I wanted to believe it was innocent, but deep down, I knew better. I confronted her that night. I tried to keep calm, but my voice was shaking. "Who were you talking to, Sophia?" She looked at me, eyes wide like a deer caught in headlights. Then, just like that, her expression changed. The charm turned on. "Oh, Alan, don't start. It was just a client. You're being paranoid." Paranoid. That word stuck with me. It was like she wanted me to feel crazy for questioning her. But I wasn't crazy. Something was definitely going on. That's when I decided to dig deeper. I wish I could say I found peace of mind after that night, but the truth is, I couldn't let it go. For the first time in my marriage, I started questioning Sophia, her words, her actions, her excuses. I didn't want to be that husband, the one snooping around and doubting his wife, but I also couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my gut. I started paying closer attention. I noticed how her phone was always face down, how she seemed to be glued to it. When I asked who she was texting, her responses were vague. "Work stuff," she'd say. "Nothing for you to worry about." But the way she'd swipe her phone out of my sight whenever I came near, it didn't sit right with me. One day, while she was in the shower, I gave in to my suspicions. I grabbed her phone. My hands were shaking, and my heart felt like it was going to beat out of my chest. She had a passcode, which wasn't surprising. What did surprise me was that I didn't know it. After 25 years, I didn't even know the password to my wife's phone. That was my first real wake-up call. I confronted her about it that night. I told her I didn't care about her privacy. I just wanted to know why she felt the need to keep things from me. She laughed, like I was being ridiculous. "Everyone has a passcode, Alan. You're reading way too much into this." But the thing was, she didn't used to. I remember when her phone would sit unlocked on the kitchen counter, when we'd share playlists or funny memes. Now it felt like she had this whole other life, one I wasn't a part of. And then came the second wake-up call. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I was in the garage working on one of the old trucks I'd been restoring. Sophia had gone shopping with friends, which had become a common thing lately. Her laptop was on the kitchen table, open but asleep. I don't know what possessed me to check it, but I did. What I found changed everything. There was an email open from Daniel. At first, it seemed professional, all business talk about market trends and investment properties. But then near the bottom, he wrote something that stopped me cold. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. Let's make this a regular thing. I stared at the screen, reading and rereading those words. My hands gripped the edge of the table, knuckles white. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. The wife I thought I knew, the life I thought we'd built, it all felt like a lie in that moment. When Sophia came home, I didn't even wait for her to take off her coat. I held up the laptop, pointing to the email. Explain this. Her face went pale, and for the first time in years, I saw her without that confident smug mask she always wore. But she recovered quickly, like she always did. It's not what you think, Alan, she said, her voice calm, almost patronizing. Daniel likes to joke around. It's harmless. Harmless. I shot back, my voice trembling with anger. He says, last night was incredible. What the hell is harmless about that, Sophia? She sighed, like I was being difficult. Fine. We had dinner. It was a work thing. I didn't tell you because I knew you'd overreact. You're damn right I'm overreacting, I yelled, slamming the laptop shut. Do you think I'm an idiot? Do you think I can't see what's going on here? Her expression hardened. You're blowing this way out of proportion, Alan. I've done nothing wrong. But if you keep accusing me of things I haven't done, maybe I will. That was the moment I realized the Sophia I married, the woman who promised to love and respect me, was gone. In her place was someone I didn't recognize, someone who could lie to my face without batting an eye. After that argument, things shifted between us. I didn't trust her, and she didn't seem to care. She started staying out later, sometimes not coming home until well after midnight. When I asked her where she'd been, her answers were always vague. Work dinner, or meeting with clients. Each excuse felt more like a slap in the face. The tension in our home became unbearable. Every interaction between us felt like a test. She'd roll her eyes when I asked her simple questions. I'd snap at her over the smallest things. We stopped talking about anything real, our plans, our dreams. Even the little things, like what to have for dinner, turned into arguments. It felt like I was living with a stranger. And then one day, I found undeniable proof. Sophia had gone to another one of her client meetings. I didn't believe her for a second, so I decided to follow her. I know how that sounds, controlling, paranoid. But I needed answers. I couldn't keep living in this limbo. I waited until she left, then got in my truck and tailed her. She drove to a fancy hotel downtown. My heart was pounding as I parked across the street, watching her walk inside. She wasn't dressed for a business meeting. She was wearing a tight black dress, the kind she hadn't worn in years, not for me at least. I sat in my truck, debating what to do. Part of me wanted to storm in there and cause a scene, but another part of me, the part that still loved her, wanted to pretend it wasn't happening. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was some innocent explanation. But deep down, I knew better. After about 20 minutes, I couldn't take it anymore. I went inside. My palms were sweaty, and my stomach was in knots. I asked the front desk clerk if they'd seen a woman matching Sophia's description. The clerk hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but then he nodded. She went up to the penthouse suite. The penthouse. Of course. I took the elevator up, feeling like I was walking to my own execution. When I got to the door, I didn't hesitate. I knocked loudly. My heart was racing, my fists clenched at my sides. I heard muffled voices inside, then footsteps. The door opened, and there he was, Daniel. He stood there in nothing but a robe, looking smug as ever. "Alan," he said, as if he were greeting an old friend. What a surprise. I pushed past him, not caring about the consequences. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice shaking with rage. Sophia appeared from the bedroom, her face pale. She was wearing one of those hotel robes, her hair tousled like she'd just rolled out of bed. "Alan," she said, her voice low. "You shouldn't be here." "I shouldn't be here?" I snapped. "Are you serious right now, Sophia? What the hell is going on?" She didn't answer. She just stood there, arms crossed, like she was daring me to make a scene. Daniel, meanwhile, leaned casually against the wall, a smirk on his face. "You really should calm down," he said. "This doesn't have to get ugly." Ugly? I thought it couldn't get any uglier than this. But the look on Sophia's face told me everything I needed to know. She didn't regret it. She wasn't ashamed. She was caught, and she didn't care. I turned to Daniel, my fists itching to wipe that smirk off his face. But I didn't. I couldn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I looked at Sophia, my voice breaking. "How long?" She hesitated, then shrugged. "A few months. A few months." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. All the late nights, the phone calls, the lies, they all made sense now. I stared at her, hoping for some flicker of remorse, some sign that the woman I loved was still in there. But all I saw was indifference. "You destroyed us," I said quietly. "For what?" "For him." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. I left without another word. I don't even remember the drive home. Everything was a blur, my thoughts, my emotions, the city lights rushing past me. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely take the key out of the ignition. The house felt so empty when I walked in, even though it was full of memories. Photos of us on the mantel, souvenirs from vacations that now felt like lies. All of it felt like a cruel joke. That night, I didn't sleep. I just sat in the living room, staring at nothing, trying to make sense of how my life had crumbled in a matter of hours. I wanted to scream, to break something, but mostly I just felt numb. The next morning, Sophia came home like nothing had happened. She walked in, dropped her purse on the counter, and poured herself a cup of coffee. She didn't even look at me. "Do you want to talk about it?" I asked, my voice hoarse from lack of sleep. She sighed, finally meeting my eyes. "What do you want me to say, Alan? You already know everything." Her casual tone made my blood boil. "You cheated on me, Sophia. You threw away 25 years of marriage, and you're acting like it's no big deal." She set her coffee down and crossed her arms. "Don't act like you're perfect, Alan. You've been distant for years." I was lonely. Lonely. I snapped. "You had a husband who would have done anything for you. I worked my ass off to give us this life, and you repay me by sleeping with that scumbag." Her eyes narrowed. "Don't you dare try to make this all about him. This was about us. Or did you forget how you've been so wrapped up in your work that you barely noticed me anymore?" Her words stung, but I wasn't about to let her shift the blame. "Don't turn this around on me," I said, pointing a finger at her. "If you were unhappy, you could have talked to me. But instead, you went behind my back and lied to me." She rolled her eyes, that same dismissive gesture that had been driving me insane for months. "You're so dramatic, Alan. People cheat. It happens. You need to get over it." That was it. That was the moment I knew our marriage was over. She wasn't sorry. She didn't care about what she'd done or how it had affected me. All she cared about was justifying her actions. I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady. "You need to leave." She looked at me, shocked. "What?" "You heard me," I said firmly. "I want you out of this house." She laughed bitterly. "This house? The one I helped pay for? The one I decorated? You're not kicking me out, Alan." It was like she wanted a fight, but I wasn't going to give her one. "Fine," I said, my voice cold. "Then I'll leave. But don't think for a second that I'm going to make this easy for you. I'm calling a lawyer." Her face hardened. "A lawyer? Really? You're going to drag this out and make it messy?" "Messy," I repeated, incredulous. "You think I care about messy after what you've done? You've already ruined everything, Sophia. You've made your bed. Now lie in it." I walked out of the house, slamming the door behind me. I didn't know where I was going, I just needed to get away. I drove aimlessly for hours, trying to figure out what to do next. All I knew was that I couldn't keep living like this. Something had to change. I ended up at my friend Greg's place. Greg and I had been friends since high school, one of those friendships that had survived time, distance, and everything in between. He was the guy I could count on, and right now, I needed someone who wouldn't ask too many questions. When he opened the door and saw my face, he didn't even hesitate. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. I told him everything. Every detail about Sophia, Daniel, the hotel, everything. By the time I was done, I felt drained, but saying it out loud helped me think more clearly. Greg sat there, listening without interrupting, letting me get it all off my chest. When I finally finished, he leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. "Man, I can't even imagine. But you can't just let this happen. You've got to protect yourself." He was right. As much as I wanted to wallow in self-pity, I couldn't afford to let my emotions blind me. I had too much to lose: my business, the house, everything I'd worked for. I needed to act, and fast. The next day, I contacted a lawyer. Her name was Karen Mitchell, and she came highly recommended. From the moment we sat down in her office, I knew I'd made the right choice. She didn't sugarcoat anything, which I appreciated. She laid out all the possible scenarios: what Sophia could claim, what I could counterclaim, and how to protect my assets. "Do you have proof of the affair?" Karen asked. I nodded. I found emails. I caught them together at a hotel. She made a note, her expression calm and focused. "Good. That's going to be important. If this goes to court, we'll need solid evidence." She asked about our finances, joint accounts, property ownership, everything. I told her about the house, my business, and how most of our savings were tied up in investments. "She's going to fight for her share," Karen warned. "You need to be prepared." I spent the next few days gathering everything I could: bank statements, business records, even old emails. It was exhausting, both emotionally and physically, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't let Sophia and Daniel take everything I'd worked for. Meanwhile, Sophia wasn't making things easy. She stayed in the house, acting like nothing had happened. She even had the nerve to bring Daniel up in conversation, as if I was supposed to be okay with it. One night, I came home to find her sitting in the living room with a glass of wine. "You're late," she said, not even looking up from her phone. "I'm not here to chat, Sophia," I replied, walking past her to grab some clothes. "Is this how it's going to be now?" she asked, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "You sulking around while I try to hold this family together?" I stopped in my tracks, my anger boiling over. "Hold this family together? You blew it apart, Sophia. You're the one who chose him over us." She shrugged, taking a sip of her wine. "You're being dramatic again. We can work this out if you just stop being so stubborn." Her indifference was maddening, but I refused to let her bait me. "I'm done talking," I said, walking out of the room. I spent the night at Greg's again, but my mind was racing. Sophia's calm, almost smug attitude told me she wasn't done playing games. If she thought she could outsmart me, she had another thing coming. A week later, I got my first big break. Karen had hired a private investigator to dig into Daniel's background. What they found was a goldmine. Turns out, Daniel wasn't just morally corrupt, he was legally shady too. Fraud, tax evasion, shady business deals, you name it. The guy had skeletons in every closet. Karen's advice was clear: use this. If you can expose him, you weaken his influence over Sophia and make her look bad for being involved with him. It's not just about divorce, it's about protecting your reputation. And that's exactly what I planned to do. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. Armed with the evidence against Daniel, I felt a new sense of purpose. Karen worked quickly, drafting documents to protect my business and freeze joint accounts before Sophia could make any bold moves. Meanwhile, the private investigator kept digging into Daniel's activities, uncovering more of his fraudulent schemes. Sophia seemed oblivious to what was happening behind the scenes. She spent her days shopping, meeting friends, and pretending life was normal. One evening, she even had the audacity to suggest we discuss terms over dinner. "What terms?" I asked, my voice cold. "Divorce terms," she said casually. "There's no need to make this uglier than it has to be. We can split things fairly." I couldn't help but laugh. "Fairly? You mean after you betrayed me and put our future on the line with that scumbag?" Her expression hardened. "This isn't just about us, Alan. You don't want to ruin my life over one mistake." "One mistake?" I snapped. "You've been lying for months, Sophia. Don't act like you're the victim." She sighed, clearly frustrated. "Fine. If you want to play hardball, we'll play hardball." I didn't respond. Instead, I handed her a folder containing copies of Daniel's financial crimes. "You might want to rethink that." Her face went pale as she flipped through the pages. "What is this?" "Your boyfriend's skeletons," I said, watching her squirm. "If you're smart, you'll walk away before I make them public." Sophia didn't have much to say after that. For the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely scared. The morning after our conversation, Sophia was unusually quiet. She didn't slam doors or throw out snide remarks like she usually did. She was pacing the kitchen, phone in hand, likely texting Daniel. I could only imagine the panic on his end when she told him what I had. By the afternoon, my lawyer called with an update. "We sent Daniel's files to the authorities anonymously," Karen said. "We're starting to see the first ripples." That same evening, Sophia stormed into the house, slamming the door behind her. "What did you do, Alan?" she demanded, her voice shaking. "I did what you didn't have the guts to do," I replied calmly. "I put a spotlight on him." Her face twisted in anger. "Do you realize what you've done? Daniel's furious. He says this could destroy his career." "That's the point," I said, unfazed. "And if you don't want to go down with him, I suggest you start cooperating." She glared at me, but I could see the fear beneath the anger. Daniel's power had always been her safety net, and now it was unraveling. Within days, the fallout began. News outlets picked up on the fraud allegations, and Daniel's name was plastered everywhere. His investors started pulling out, and one of his business partners filed a lawsuit against him. The man who once acted untouchable was now scrambling to save face. Sophia's demeanor shifted. She stopped defending Daniel and started pleading with me. "Can we just settle this quietly?" she asked one evening, her tone desperate. "Quietly?" I echoed, shaking my head. "You've been anything but quiet, Sophia. Now, it's my turn to clean up the mess." Sophia's confidence was crumbling, and I wasn't about to let up. With Daniel's world falling apart, she was losing the one person she thought she could rely on. But instead of feeling pity, I felt relief. She was finally beginning to understand what it felt like to have the ground pulled out from under her. One evening, she cornered me in the kitchen. "Alan," she began, her voice softer than I'd heard in months. "I was wrong. About everything. I want to fix this." I didn't even look up from the documents I was reviewing. "Fix what, Sophia? The marriage you destroyed? The life you derailed? Or are you just trying to save yourself now that Daniel's gone?" She flinched at my words, her eyes glistening with tears. "I made a mistake. I let things spiral out of control, but I don't want to lose you." Her sudden remorse felt hollow. "You already lost me, Sophia. The moment you chose him over us, it was over." She reached for my hand, but I pulled it away. "You think you can cry your way out of this?" I asked, my tone sharp. "I've spent months watching you lie to my face, making me feel like I was the problem. Now you're stuck with the consequences." She didn't argue. For once, she was silent. It wasn't guilt or regret that drove her to apologize, it was desperation. Without Daniel, she had no backup plan. The next day, I received a call from Karen. "We've frozen the joint accounts, and the court is likely to side with you on the business assets," she informed me. "Sophia's already reached out to her lawyer. She's trying to negotiate." I felt a small sense of victory. Sophia's manipulative tactics were failing, and now she was scrambling for scraps. I told Karen to hold firm. I wasn't going to let Sophia walk away with more than she deserved. By the end of the week, Daniel's company had announced his resignation amid mounting legal troubles. Sophia tried to downplay her involvement with him, but the damage was done. Her social circle, the one she prided herself on, began to turn against her. For the first time, she was truly alone. The weeks following Daniel's fall were eerily quiet. Sophia avoided me as much as possible, keeping to herself in the guest room. Part of me expected her to lash out, but instead, she seemed deflated. I should have known better. One morning, I came home from a meeting with Karen to find Sophia waiting for me in the living room. Her lawyer was with her. She wore a calm, calculated expression, one I hadn't seen in a while. "I want to settle," she said simply. "Settle?" I asked, suspicious. "What's the catch?" "No catch," she replied smoothly. "We can keep dragging this out, or we can end it now. I'll leave the house, and you keep your business. In return, I want a lump sum. Something fair." I glanced at her lawyer, who didn't make eye contact. They were desperate. With Daniel gone, her leverage was non-existent, and she knew it. But I also knew Sophia well enough to realize this wasn't a simple surrender. Karen had prepped me for this. "Don't take her at her word," she'd warned. People like her don't walk away without trying to get the upper hand. Still, I played along. How much are we talking? I asked, crossing my arms. Sophia named a figure that was high, but not outrageous. It's enough for me to start over, she said. I think that's reasonable. I didn't trust her, but the thought of ending this nightmare was tempting. I told her I'd think about it and discuss it with Karen. Her lawyer handed me a draft agreement before they left. As soon as the door closed, I skimmed the document. Sure enough, buried in the fine print was a clause giving her access to joint investments we hadn't discussed. It was a sneaky move, but not surprising. I sent the agreement straight to Karen. Tear it apart, I told her. I'm not letting her walk away with more than she deserves. That night, Sophia tried to corner me again. Have you thought about my offer? She asked, her tone casual. Sure, I said. I think it's generous. Too generous, actually. Did you think I wouldn't notice the little extras you slipped in? Her mask slipped for a moment, and I saw the frustration in her eyes. I'm just trying to move on, Alan, she said, exasperated. Then do it honestly, I snapped. You don't get to clean me out just because your boyfriend's life is in shambles. She didn't reply. Instead, she stormed upstairs, slamming the door behind her. It was clear she wasn't giving up, but neither was I. After Sophia's failed attempt to outmaneuver me, the atmosphere in the house became unbearable. Every interaction was a battle of cold stares and tense silences. She avoided me when possible, but I knew she was working on her next move. I could feel it. Karen called a few days later with an update. We've revised the settlement terms and sent them back to her lawyer, she said. But I need you to be prepared. Sophia may try to play dirty. How much dirtier can she get? I asked bitterly. Plenty, Karen replied. People like her lash out when they realize they're losing control. She wasn't wrong. That night, Sophia made her move. I came home to find her packing a suitcase in the living room. At first, I thought she was leaving, but then I noticed her expression, smug, almost triumphant. I'll be staying with a friend for a while, she said. I need some space from all of this tension. I didn't believe her for a second. What's the real reason, Sophia? I asked. Running off to regroup with Daniel now that he's out of the headlines? Her eyes narrowed. You think you're so clever, don't you? But you'll see soon enough, Alan. I don't need him, or you. She slammed the door behind her, leaving me standing there, uneasy. The next morning, Karen called again. Sophia's lawyer just filed a motion to freeze your business assets, she said grimly. She's claiming you've been hiding income. The audacity was almost laughable. Hiding income? I asked. She knows exactly where my money is. It's all in our accounts. She's trying to force your hand, Karen explained. If the court agrees, it could delay everything for months. But don't worry, we've got enough evidence to prove her claim is baseless. My anger simmered as I hung up the phone. This wasn't just about divorce anymore, it was a full-blown war. And if Sophia wanted to fight dirty, I was ready to meet her on the battlefield. Sophia's attempt to freeze my business assets was a direct hit, but I wasn't about to let her win. Karen moved quickly, filing a rebuttal with evidence that my finances were transparent. The motion was denied within days. It was a small victory, but it gave me the momentum I needed to push back. Meanwhile, the fallout from Daniel's legal troubles was spreading. He was facing lawsuits from multiple investors, and whispers of a criminal investigation were growing louder. I kept an eye on the news, watching as his empire crumbled piece by piece. It was satisfying, but I knew the battle wasn't over yet. Sophia's behavior became more erratic. One day, she'd send texts asking to talk things through, acting as though reconciliation was still possible. The next, she'd have her lawyer fire off another baseless accusation. It was exhausting, but I refused to let her games distract me. Instead, I focused on gathering more ammunition. The private investigator uncovered emails between Sophia and Daniel that revealed just how deeply she'd been involved in his schemes. While she might not have participated directly, her knowledge and support of his actions painted a damning picture. She's tied to his mess more than she realizes, Karen told me during one of our calls. We can use this to negotiate. A week later, Sophia called me out of the blue. We need to talk, she said, her voice unusually serious. I hesitated but agreed to meet her at the house. When I arrived, she was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of coffee in her hands. For the first time in months, She looked vulnerable. "I'm tired of fighting," she said quietly. "This isn't what I wanted." I folded my arms, keeping my distance. "What did you expect, Sophia? You lied, cheated, and tried to take everything from me. Now you want peace." She flinched at my words but held her ground. "I made mistakes. I see that now. But dragging this out isn't helping either of us." I didn't trust her sudden change of tone. "What do you really want?" Her eyes darted to the stack of papers on the counter, her lawyer's latest proposal. "I want to settle. No tricks this time." I picked up the documents and scanned them. The terms were significantly reduced from her previous demands, almost fair. It was tempting, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her sudden surrender. "I'll think about it," I said, setting the papers down. She nodded, but her expression gave nothing away. As I walked out, I couldn't tell if she was finally giving up, or setting the stage for her next move. I didn't sign the settlement right away. Karen and I reviewed every line, looking for hidden traps. To my surprise, it was clean, no secret clauses or unreasonable demands. That only made me more suspicious. Sophia had never been one to back down without a fight. A few days later, I got my answer. A news article popped up in my email, sent by the private investigator. Daniel's troubles had worsened. He was officially under investigation for embezzlement and fraud. His assets were frozen, and several of his properties, including the penthouse where I caught them, had been seized. The article also mentioned an unnamed associate who had been aiding him. Though it didn't name Sophia outright, the implications were clear. Her connection to Daniel wasn't just personal, it was financial. That evening, I came home to find Sophia sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the TV. She looked defeated. Her once polished appearance was gone, replaced by an oversized sweatshirt and tear-streaked face. She didn't even react when I walked in. "What's going on?" I asked, unable to hide my curiosity. She glanced at me, her eyes hollow. "Daniel cut me off," she said flatly. "He said I was too much of a liability." For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. But then I remembered everything she'd put me through. This was her mess, not mine. "Looks like you bet on the wrong horse," I said, my tone cold. Her lip quivered, but she didn't argue. "You don't understand," she whispered. "Everything is falling apart. People are calling me, asking questions, accusing me of things I didn't even do." "You didn't do?" I scoffed. "You were complicit, Sophia. You were part of his schemes, whether you admit it or not." Tears spilled down her cheeks, but I didn't flinch. She had spent months tearing me down, and now she wanted my sympathy? No chance. "You're on your own," I said firmly. "Whatever fallout comes your way, it's not my problem." She didn't respond, just curled up on the couch, sobbing quietly. For the first time, she looked like she truly understood the magnitude of what she'd done. But it was too late for regrets. Sophia's world was crumbling, and for the first time, I felt like I was firmly in control. She had nowhere to turn. Her social circle had distanced themselves, Daniel had abandoned her, and the looming investigation into his crimes threatened to pull her in. Still, I wasn't about to let my guard down. Karen reached out a few days later with some good news. "We've finalized the financial separation terms," she said. "Her lawyer has agreed to our conditions. She'll walk away with far less than she originally demanded." I couldn't hide my relief. The thought of Sophia profiting from her betrayal had been eating at me. "What's the catch?" I asked, skeptical. "No catch," Karen replied. "She's clearly desperate. I think she's just trying to salvage what little she has left." I signed the agreement that same afternoon. Sophia's lawyer sent it back without any changes. Just like that, the fight over assets was over. But I wasn't done yet. Daniel's downfall continued to escalate. The private investigator found a treasure trove of incriminating documents tying him to several illegal deals. I forwarded everything to the authorities anonymously, ensuring there'd be no way for Sophia to pin any of it back on me. That night, Sophia cornered me in the kitchen again. She looked exhausted, her confidence completely drained. "I know you hate me," she started, her voice shaky. "But I need to know, did you have anything to do with Daniel's legal troubles?" I leaned against the counter, meeting her gaze without flinching. "What if I did?" I asked. Her face paled, and for a moment, she was speechless. "You're destroying him," she said finally. And by extension me. No, Sophia, I replied coldly. You destroyed yourself the moment you sided with him. I'm just making sure you can't take me down with you. She opened her mouth to argue, but no words came out. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there in silence. By the end of the week, Daniel's name was everywhere. His businesses were shuttered, and he was facing criminal charges that could put him away for years. As for Sophia, her name began appearing in the investigations too, not as a direct accomplice, but as someone who might have had knowledge of his illegal activities. She packed her bags and left the house shortly after. This isn't over, she said as she walked out the door. I didn't respond. For me, it was over. She just didn't realize it yet. Once Sophia walked out, the house felt quieter, emptier, strangely peaceful. I thought I'd feel triumph, maybe even satisfaction. After all, this was the moment I had worked for, where her manipulations and lies had finally caught up to her. But if I'm being honest, all I felt was exhaustion. 25 years of marriage reduced to nothing but legal papers and bitter memories. Sophia had no idea what was waiting for her outside these walls. The media frenzy around Daniel wasn't letting up. His arrest had made national headlines. Pictures of him being escorted in handcuffs out of his downtown office were everywhere. Reporters speculated about who else might be implicated in his schemes. Though Sophia wasn't mentioned by name in most articles, the rumors were enough to make her a social pariah. I knew she wasn't staying with friends. That would have required her to have friends left. Daniel's fall had tainted her entire social circle. Those people she spent years trying to impress? They weren't returning her calls anymore. A few days after she left, I got a call from the private investigator. You're going to want to see this, he said, his tone sharper than usual. He emailed me a series of photos and documents. The photos were of Sophia and Daniel together at a cafe near the courthouse. Daniel looked gaunt, his usual smugness replaced by desperation. They weren't sitting close or holding hands like lovers. They were arguing. Sophia's expression was one of pure panic, her hands gripping the edge of the table. Daniel, on the other hand, looked cold, detached. They met 2 days ago, the investigator explained. Looks like she's trying to convince him of something, probably to protect her from the fallout. But he's not biting. I stared at the photos for a long time, the reality of their situation sinking in. Sophia had hitched her wagon to Daniel, and now that his empire was burning, she was scrambling to avoid being pulled into the flames. But Daniel wasn't going to save her. He couldn't even save himself. 2 weeks later, the inevitable happened. I got a call from a former mutual friend of ours, a lawyer who worked tangentially with the firm handling Daniel's case. Alan, I don't know how much you've kept up with Sophia, he began cautiously, but she's been subpoenaed. The words hung in the air like a bomb. Subpoenaed for what? I asked, though I already had a good idea. They want her as a witness in Daniel's case. The investigators believe she knew about some of his illegal activities. Depending on how she cooperates, she could face charges of her own. I leaned back in my chair, processing what he'd just said. It was one thing to watch her life crumble from afar. It was another to know she was being dragged into the legal mess she helped create. Do you think she'll cooperate? I asked. He hesitated. Honestly? If she doesn't, she's a fool. They don't have solid evidence against her yet, just circumstantial connections. If she plays her cards right, she could get away with minimal damage. But if she tries to protect Daniel, well, she'll sink with him. I thanked him for the information and hung up. A part of me wanted to laugh at the irony. Sophia, who had spent her life charming her way into people's good graces, was now completely out of options. She had played the game for years, but the stakes had never been higher. A few days later, I received an unexpected visitor. Sophia showed up at the house, looking like a shadow of the woman I once knew. Her hair was unkempt, her clothes wrinkled, and her eyes bloodshot. Alan, can we talk? She asked, her voice trembling. I didn't want to let her in, but curiosity got the better of me. You've got 5 minutes, I said, stepping aside. She sat down at the kitchen table, the same spot where we'd shared countless meals and arguments over the years. She looked around, as if noticing the house for the first time. It feels different here, she murmured. That's because it is, I said coldly. What do you want, Sophia? She clasped her hands together, struggling to find the right words. They subpoenaed me, she finally admitted. I'm supposed to testify against Daniel. I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. So, what's the problem? Go tell the truth for once in your life. Her head snapped up, her eyes filled with desperation. You don't understand. If I testify, they're going to dig into everything. They'll scrutinize every interaction I had with Daniel, every deal I helped him with. I could go to jail, Alan. You think I'm going to feel sorry for you? I snapped. You brought this on yourself, Sophia. You chose him over me, over us. Now you get to live with the consequences. She broke down, sobbing into her hands. I didn't know it would go this far, she choked out. I didn't think he'd drag me into this. I watched her cry, feeling nothing. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't my wife, not anymore. She was just a stranger who had ruined her own life and now wanted me to pick up the pieces. Let me ask you something, I said after a long silence. If Daniel hadn't been caught, would you have ever stopped? Or would you have kept lying to me, sneaking around, playing happy wife while you built your life with him? Her sobbing quieted. She didn't answer. She didn't have to. Get out, I said, standing up. Whatever mess you're in, it's not my problem. You made your choice. She looked up at me, her face crumpled with despair. Alan, please. I have nowhere else to go. And whose fault is that? I replied coldly. You burned every bridge you had. Now you get to live with it. She stood slowly, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Without another word, she walked out the door. As I watched her leave, I felt a strange sense of closure. For years, Sophia had controlled our narrative. She had lied, manipulated, and betrayed me. But now, the truth was finally catching up to her, and I wasn't going to be there to save her. Sophia didn't contact me again after that day. I heard from mutual acquaintances that she was struggling, moving from place to place, trying to stay out of the spotlight. Daniel's trial began a few weeks later, and though her name came up, it wasn't enough to bring charges against her. She'd managed to avoid legal consequences, for now, but the damage to her reputation was permanent. For me, life finally started to feel normal. The divorce was finalized, and the house, business, and savings were officially mine. I poured my energy into rebuilding, not just my finances but myself. I reconnected with friends, found joy in the small things, and began envisioning a future without the weight of Sophia's betrayal. One evening, as I sat on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I realized something. I didn't feel angry anymore. Not at her, not at Daniel. They were out of my life, left to deal with the mess they'd made. I was free, truly free, to start over. And I planned to make the most of it.